Shall we get started?
Perfect. Let's get going.
All right. So welcome to our LinkedIn Live. We're going to introduce ourselves in a moment, but just a little bit of housekeeping. We love to hear your questions. So there should be a chat opportunity for you to put your questions in. Feel free to ask questions as you go, and then we'll pick them all up at the end when we've got our Q&A session. So yeah, don't be shy. We have nothing that we're not willing to talk about. So feel free to ask as many questions as you like. Can we get the slides up, please, Sarah?
Sarah isn't imaginary. She's our aide in the background. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about how in education we can become more data-driven, more data-guided. And we are talking today with Helen Blakey from Aston University, the CDO. So we're just going to do some quick introductions. So over to you, Helen.
Thanks, Tolu. Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Blakey. I'm, as it says on the slide, I'm Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Aston University. Been at Aston for around the last 4 years. Prior to that, I've had many data, finance, commercial roles across multiple sectors, from the tyre industry through to oil, through to financial management and financial services and retail.
Excellent. Shall I go next then? I'm up next. Great. So I'm Katie Googler, Director of Education and Data at Data Literacy Academy, and was fortunate enough to be part of Helen's journey with us and be educator on the programme that we're going to talk about and give you a bit more detail. And prior to that, I've also worked in industry, so most recently at the Royal College of Nursing as a first-generation CDO as well, so bring that experience across to the programmes that we deliver. So over to you, Tolu.
Thank you. So I'm Tolu. I'm a Senior Strategic Advisor at Data Literacy Academy. And in my past life, I worked at Sky, the TV company, for about 12 years. I came from a more commercial background, so I did a business degree. But as part of my grad scheme, did a 6-week rotation in analytics, and I absolutely loved it. I'd never heard of it before.
Well, that's a great start. See you, Tolu. Bye. Welcome back.
Welcome back. Thank you. The village internet is betraying me right now. So I fell in love with data along the way, and then I built a 10-year career in data. And my last role was head of data visualization at Sky, so responsible for Tableau across the group. And for those of you that don't know about Data Literacy Academy, what we do is we help large organizations to transform through data literacy education programs. So that's what we're going to be talking about today with Katie and Helen as well. Oh, that went 2 slides. So the outcome that we want from this session is to firstly to recognize the importance of data in higher education, understand and share our proven approach to build a thriving data culture, and to learn how to apply actionable strategies to drive both leadership, which is really, really important to get the buy-in, and also across the institution as well. So I'm going to hand over to Helen to share a little bit about Aston.
Thanks, Tolu. So Aston University, for anybody who doesn't know, is a university based in the centre of England, in Birmingham. We have approximately 18,000 students currently, but growing, with about 2,000 employees across both academic and professional services. We are 18,000 students is a medium-sized university, and we are a teaching university, but also a research university with a clear focus on encouraging our students in terms of social mobility and value adds that we give to our students. We're really proud of some of the accolades that we've got over the last few years. So we were the Daily Mail University of the Year for Student Success, also top 20 in the UK for graduate prospects. And most recently, we were second in England for social mobility, which is absolutely key. And to be honest, one of the reasons I moved into the higher education sector, because you can really see the impact that we're having across communities and with our students. Just moving on to, I guess, some of the challenges within the higher education sector. So So typically, the higher education sector has been well funded in previous generations, but over the last few years, we've had multiple black swan events really that have really impacted our sector. So the our fundings from the government in terms of home undergraduate fees, that's been frozen for over the last decade. So £9,250 hasn't changed since 2008, albeit we are going to see a small increase over the next few years. That really isn't a sustainable business model for a university, coupled with the fact that the costs have increased significantly over that time. UK visa changes have been a real challenge as well. So, no dependents being able to come into the UK, visa costs going up by 65%, coupled with the health costs as well that our international students are having to fund. So that's been really difficult for the whole of the sector to be able to actually be a sustainable business model. I'm sure everybody's seen in the news that the OFS report recently said that a significant number of universities will be in deficit by next year. So that's a really real challenge, as well as also having to respond to some of the changing markets. When you look at international students, the changes in markets in Nigeria, in India, and China specifically have been really challenging to navigate. The final thing, I guess, is probably applicable in every sector, really. So, and it's no different in higher education. So, lots of competition within higher education. We're all fishing in the same pools in terms of making sure that we can get the right students into our programs. But it's really tough to recruit the best talent and also retain the best talent. And that's why we're really striving to ensure that the talent that we have in Aston, and we do have some great talent, it has to be said, we're giving them the tools and the skills and the capabilities to enable them to co-create this university of the future, to be more sustainable as a business model and not just keep doing what we've been doing before. So I guess, thanks, Tolu. In terms of what have we done as Aston to address some of these things, I guess the first thing is that we did recognise that we had some of these issues as a sector 2 years ago now, really, when we embarked on our 2030 strategy. And the challenging landscape that presents itself really needed us to think differently. And how could we develop a new model of university for the changing world? So we set a really ambitious strategy, our 2030 strategy, and that was really our North Star across three key themes: our students, our people, our place, and also our impact, which is really why we're here. So we had a very clear vision and purpose, ensuring that we are inclusive in everything we do, we're entrepreneurial and we're transformational. So those were the things that we really wanted to ensure that we're moving towards over this period to 2030. So what did we do across those themes? Well, we developed almost a cadence of performance measurement. It was something that isn't typical in the higher education sector. There are lots of good universities who do this currently. We weren't one of them. We didn't really have a clear performance measurement framework, a clear measure of success to enable us to know whether we were tracking the right way. So we set up a strategic management system to enable us to do that. Underpinning that, we had some measures of success. As with everything, you need to know where you're starting from, you need to know where you're going, and you need to know whether you're actually on track. So we developed 54 measures of success across those three key themes. And what that enabled us to do was really promote accountability across the whole of the organisation. And these measures of success underpinned our strategy. And that's something that's absolutely key when you're developing data strategies and data cultures, to ensure that actually everything that you're doing is focused on your business strategy. And we've really realised that if we had to do this and we've got measures of success, people need to understand data. People need to be confident in understanding data and being able to talk about data. It's not just my job to talk about data. I always talk about the fact that data is a team sport, as Katie and Tolu, you guys know. It's probably one of my favourite phrases. But if it was my responsibility to report on all of these measures of success, my shoulders are just not broad enough to do it. So what we really tried to do is to change the narrative and ensure that actually it's a real team sport between the whole of the organisation, and give people some tools and skills and capabilities to be able to do that.
Thanks, Helen. And that ambition came across in everything that we did, from all of the early conversations that we had. You know, that whole, I actually use team sport in lots of other places now as well. So thank you. I keep referencing you on that one. But even with that ambition, even with that plan in place, the challenge that we see that stops people achieving that strategy and sort of gets in the way is that quite commonly businesses are split into two sides, really. And for higher education, that's things like policymakers and execs and academics that are on one side, who have all of the subject matter expertise and the knowledge of the industry and the academic background to really drive forward. And then on the other side, we have like the operational delivery and practice and data teams and strategic planning teams and performance that have this gap that is almost two-sided. You know, we talk about it being a two-sided gap of they don't know what each other know, they don't have the knowledge to bring that together. And then this communication gap is that how in an organisation the size of a university or an academic institute, with the legacy and the history that comes with that, that's just grown over time as people's experiences have brought them into different places. So it's definitely not just about making the data people more data educated or data literate and better at data. It's, as you've said, Helen, much more about bringing all of those people on that same journey. So you're starting sort of in the same place and working on it together. And one of the things I found was we had lots of early conversations about being data literate and using the language around that in an academic setting where you're talking to deans and professors and really highly educated people, and how we would work through that to ensure that even anybody in any role feels that confidence that other people feel as well. And this, one of the things that came up quite clearly was this whole concept that comes out in education about taught fear or learned fear. And this is the concept, and again, jump in if you want to add anything about personal examples with this, Helen, but this whole concept very much is about we teach ourselves things that we're not very good at and that we become a bit distant to or reject from our own personal development. And that might be commonly things like languages. That comes up a lot. We hear a lot of the people internal to our organisation talk about, oh, I've had a bad experience, I just can't do it. And become a bit nervous of even being in conversations where that is pushing them in that direction. And this is definitely the case for data and for maths and stats. Even if people are working with it day in and day out, that whole, oh my God, I'm not a data person. I'm so scared of like, if I'm going to be called out about my maths skills, I've not used maths in such a long time, that's a real problem. So even when we're talking in a higher education institute, there's still this concept of taught or learned fear around this subject. Would you agree, Helen?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it sometimes can be worse in academia because academics are highly intelligent, as you say, and very, very skilled in their own métiers. So actually, sometimes it's quite hard to say, actually, I'm not very comfortable in this area. So sometimes I think it can be a little bit worse. But for sure, I think we definitely experience that. And actually, that's through no fault of anybody within the organisation as well, because they've not had the tools previously. They've not had access to the data. And you can only get confident with something if you can practice it on a regular basis.
Yeah. So our approach in those early stages with you, and we'll get onto the journey in a moment, is very much about bringing this gap as narrow as possible. So bringing the knowledge on both parties, both sides, closer together so that they can talk a shared language and they can start to communicate more closely together and solve problems together, really. That's what it's all about. It's about what's the impact or the investment that we're putting into all of the things that go into that strategy to make it work, how do we take everybody on that to really add that value, and that we're all definitely pulling in that same direction? So that was the real driver for us at Data Literacy Academy, and our purpose was to help you, Helen, and your team bring and bridge that gap and bring it closer and narrower.
A fun fact which no one asked for is that my taught fear is swimming. So I remember the first time that I got in a pool, I sunk all the way to the bottom, and I reached out to try and pull myself up, and I grabbed someone's shorts and pulled them down. So for like the longest time, my thing was I can't swim, I can't float, and I only recently, like 2 years ago, learned how to swim in the ocean. So taught fear is such a real thing that we see in our day-to-day lives. But yeah, that's my fun fact for my taught fear.
Yeah, slightly too much information. I've also been in water with Tolu and can say that, yeah, I can see that, but he's overcome that fear. Yeah. Okay, so when we start to talk about taking people on that journey, what does that actually look like? And often, or more often than not, people will start in at the top end of this curve. So this curve matches and marries up with what you would be really familiar with on a data maturity curve. But we all hone in, especially as data professionals, hone in on what are the skills we need to do this, and how do we take people to be better at what they do and be more be able to add more value through analytics, or now the world of AI. But we always start pretty much in the middle and work upwards. But the thing that we've seen is that just widens the gap. You know, you're just making data professionals more capable, more credible, more experienced, and what's seemingly happening a lot more, and we see it in most of the conversations we have, is if you don't take those other people that have been in the business for a while, are in different roles, that haven't recognized the impact of data on them, or do and don't know how to address it, you just create a wider gap, and you really struggle to then get people to adopt new technologies, or to get excited about data, or to be involved in those dashboards and the ways of working that Helen's that we've been talking about a lot with Aston. And what we did with Aston was we committed to a baseline and a journey that everybody could be part of. So there was a commitment under that strategy about everybody, every employee will be invested in, everybody will be given that opportunity to learn and to upskill and to develop. And I think that's really different. I think that's a really exciting place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Katie. And I think we started on this journey. I think where we were on the left-hand side, I'm not sure there was an absence of data literacy, but the way that I would describe it at Aston specifically is we had data literacy or data confidence in silos. So it wasn't really joined up. And that's because some people had access to data and other people didn't. And some people had come from other places that were a lot more data focused. But what we really wanted to do is, as you were saying, was really get everybody to a common baseline so that we're talking the same language. Even our academics who actually profess in artificial intelligence and deep data analytics, actually, well, what does that mean for Aston and how do we put it into context? And that's really what a lot of this was about, making sure that we can contextualize our data and make decisions using our data without actually thinking about it, so subconsciously, as opposed to it being quite painful as it has been previously. So we can talk about the approach, and I'm sure we will as we move on. But I think that there are two different ways of doing it, in my view. My initial thought, and what I really wanted to do, is really think big, start small. So let's start with a nice tame cohort. We've built some nice data products. We had people using them. Some people were really confident, but you could see that some people were not so confident. So let's get those guys on the journey. Every time we build a data product, let's put a wrapper.
That didn't happen though, did it?
It certainly didn't. It certainly didn't. So our highly ambitious Vice Chancellor really liked what we were doing and said, no, I want the whole of our senior leadership team to be doing this. At which point I got a little bit scared because I suddenly went from a small proof of concept to a large cohort of over 100 of our most senior leaders in the organisation. Not really the place that I would start. However, it was perfect. And the reason it was perfect was we had a tool that they all had to use, the Strategic Measures of Success dashboard. So actually there was a real need. It was the right time because it was there, and my team were beavering away, making sure that we had it all available. And the other thing is we got some really good feedback. So at the end of the day, those senior leaders are the people that know their teams better than anybody else and better than me. As part of one of our measures is to make sure that every single person in the organisation is data confident by 2030 and has undergone some sort of skills upskilling. So to do that, we needed feedback from everybody in the organisation. So in hindsight, it was brave, but actually it worked. And the thing about that was actually we had to take into account all of the different personas as well. So it wasn't just a single persona of people who were using these dashboards. It was people from the vice chancellors all the way through to some very technical people. So we had to adapt for each of those personas.
Yeah, and they were super receptive to it as well. So some of those early conversations were some people just saying, "I really need this," which it was very vulnerable. And when we start to talk about having role models and how you're going to role model that across the business, that was definitely such a benefit to go through that with them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important, even with this curve, is that it's a really personal journey. Like you said, Helen, there are pockets of data literate people, but it's not always uniform, and everybody starts at a slightly different place. And that's why I think if we go onto the behavioral personas, like it's really important that we understand where people are at and take them on the journey from that point, not just try and put everybody into the same thing. So Katie, do you want to explain a bit more about the behavioral personas?
Yes, certainly. So I think this is one of the sort of hidden nuggets of what we talk about regularly with our clients, and was really beneficial as well for Aston, was because there's often a drive towards job-based personas or role-aligned personas where you say all these people in this role, even if they were there exactly the same amount of time, in exactly the same background, we treat them all the same. And that doesn't work in practice, especially with a cohort like the senior leaders that we picked up with Aston, was because even if they're all in the same job title and have been in the same role for the same amount of time and have come from the same background, their personal journey is very different. And some people were really, really excited about it. You know, you come across people that might be the professors and deans, like Helen said, in that's their specialism area. They're teaching this as their profession. And they get really excited and they're just like, oh, let me test you on this because this is the stuff I'm really excited about, versus the people that are like, that doesn't cross my path at all. I have had no previous reason to engage with the data team or no previous reason to even come across a dashboard, and their disciplines have just not had that interaction with data, and it's not been part of their responsibility. And even if so what we look at then is about actually categorizing those people against behaviors and their relationship and attitudes and confidence with data. And we do that sort of in multiple different ways, in subjective and objective ways, to make sure that people get the right learning paths for them that suits them on that journey. So there's no point trying to get everybody to that top end of that curve if that's not necessary and that doesn't add value. What we really want to do is get people to the part of the confidence and that curve that really suits them to be able to do their job more effectively, more efficiently, and deliver against that strategy. So we see a lot of people out in business in one of these personas in particular. So Tom, our top left, which is more about, as I described, the end of that grouping where it hasn't really passed their desk at all, and they're really engaging with this as a brand new concept and have heard other people talking about it. So 80% of businesses generally fall into this category. Slightly different in higher education because you've got your disciplines. But we've got other personas, like Tolu persona on top right is much more about, I do things in Excel. I've been doing it on my own in Excel. I'm not sure what the data team does or how they add value to my job. I'm just told I need to do things and I can get some information myself, and often don't always know their own limitations in that space because they don't know what good looks like or how it can be done differently. And then we've got other personas, including right through to data specialists and professionals who actually probably need less from us and this journey that we're talking about on the skill side, but definitely need more about that business acumen, that ability to work more closely with understanding the business challenges, the value that they add to the business, how to scope and question. And for all those that have joined us from that data profession, when the business comes to you and asks for something and you deliver what it's been asking for, and then they go, that's not what I asked for. And you go, well, it is what you asked for. All of that sort of engagement about how do you bring and narrow that gap of knowledge and communication. So we kind of look at it at both ends, and we definitely look at it at both ends, but we focus much more on those behaviours rather than job titles. Yeah. And that was really clear in that cohort, that strategic cohort we picked up with Aston.
I think what's really interesting when you look at the Tom persona is that often as data teams and data professionals, the people we engage with the most are probably going to be the Tolus, because they actually care. They're already starting to do some of the bits themselves, probably creating the Wild West, right? They've got like their 20 spreadsheets that they're doing everything from. But the Toms are what we often call like the silent majority. That's a massive group of people who you often don't actually hear from, especially as the data teams, because to be honest, they're quite scared of us, right? They think we talk in complicated language, which we kind of do.
Yeah. Extraordinary, right?
Exactly. Because to show that we know what we're talking about, right? But the Toms are the people who you don't really hear very much from. But if you can get the Toms on the journey, the impact of them getting it right is just absolutely massive.
Yeah, they don't say a lot, and because again that talk fear is really, really prominent. So even if you presented it, the lack of challenge back, or the being asked a follow-up question or asked for their opinion on something is just it's hard. Like, why would you put yourself in that situation? Which is actually just reminding me is part of why we talk about the change management process as well. So what we're not talking about is just the education. We're not just taking people through a journey that is, and here's some live learning, which is really valuable in that moment, but it starts much further and earlier on than that. It starts with unlocking the ways that people are thinking, really engaging with them on a personal level, getting them excited about it. So removing that fear, and that again falls into some of the things we'll touch on how did we deliver this program with Helen. Yeah.
So I think let's put the slides away and let's go into a bit of a chat. Helen, I would love to hear a little bit more about kind of the beginning of the journey. How did you get started on thinking, hey, this is what we want to do, and how did that big early engagement go?
So let me go back a couple of years. So I think I think the key is the data literacy training, and what we're doing is just one part of our journey, our data culture journey. So this is about creating a data-driven culture within Aston. It's a buzzword, but actually what does that really mean when you break it down? It means that actually in everything you do, you are what I call data guided. So you're not driven just by the data, but you're using data to also support all of that gut feel and all of those positive things that actually you should never throw away. So how can you start bringing that in to help you, particularly when you've got some challenging situations that the higher education sector has been in? So I think we started with making sure that we actually had something to talk about. So you've got to have a data platform, you've got to have a product that people can use, and you need to, and all of the other things that come with that. So I am not a tech person, as you guys will know. I can't code, never have been able to. I am a business person. But actually, you do need tools and you do need the tech. So you need something that actually enables people to get that data easily. You also need really strong governance around it, because actually, if you don't have credibility in your data and trust in your data, then actually you can do all of the training in the world, but as soon as people start using these tools, they will pick holes in it. So you need to make sure that you've got all of those, and they are absolutely key foundations for me. So we tried to get all of those in place. We didn't run a 3-year data quality program. We actually decided to build data governance wrappers around every product that we build. So it's kind of little prove value, build some more, gain some advocates, and build some more. And that was really our approach. And that was the approach that we wanted to take, as I mentioned before, in terms of building the skills and capability for the organisation.
And we ran with that, didn't we, Helen? So we integrated that into all of the conversations we had, and then about how are we delivering sort of tailored education? How are we demonstrating or drawing out use cases from the questions people ask in class, and get your team involved and say, this is how and why we're doing it this way. So it just added that context to everything we were doing about those wrappers, about things we were trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's key, isn't it? Coming back to, I guess, why we started on this journey. Really, we've all used computer-based training. We've all been there where you have to do the regulatory training and your mandatory
Yeah.
GDPR stuff. And actually, how many people really engage with that? I think the take-up stats say something like 30% take-up. So it was a no-go for me from day one, because I really wanted to do something different. And I loved the fact that working with you guys, that live learning is really powerful. So that's why we chose to do it in this way, to really get that engagement, but also the change management piece as well. Coming back to what we said before, training has its place, absolutely, but actually the change management piece is the thing that drives a change in mindset and a change in behaviour. Because if you look at that typical definition of data literacy, what are you trying to do? You're trying to build curiosity, critical thinking. I can never remember what the third C is, so Jordan has to give me some training, but it's kind of, it is all about developing those skills, and that's not, you can't just go on a training session to do that.
No.
You've
Tell us a
got
bit
to
about
change.
tell us a bit about what that change management looks like practically on the journey.
So the live learning was really, really powerful, wasn't it, Katie? And I think we saw that particularly with that first cohort.
Yeah.
Senior leadership are a lot more engaging within those sessions, typically anyway, because they'd had a lot more understanding from myself in all of the exec sessions that we did, all the senior leaders sessions. So they knew what they were getting. But the power within those live learning sessions was in the chat for me. I don't know if you, Katie.
Yeah, so we did a couple of different things, didn't we? We did some onboarding sessions early on that were all about like the getting people started and knowing that it was coming. And that was to Alex's question that's just popped in. That was engaging L&D teams and the comms teams and working with people internally to help support that. But it was like a brand piece. We were telling people we were going to start this program and to get excited by it, and did things that brought them on board. And that meant that when they came to that first live, we did the live class in person, that first one, didn't we? And the people couldn't hide then, because I was like, everybody put your computers away, put your phones away. I know you're really busy. It's only emergencies. And we set the tone with that one. And then as we did online live classes, people really engaged and had those conversations, and things that were happening in the chats, we were following up, and it was like really, really valuable feedback to go back into the data team. And some real examples came out about people who were really struggling with certain things and certain dashboards that weren't answering their questions. And the data team were like, this is rich and valuable because we can do something with this, and we can go, you said we did, or hold a lunch and learn. So actions then fell out of that, that really changed it, didn't it? So what about how choosing those early cohorts, and how going about how you decided them? Because you mentioned before about Alex coming in with his directive on this group is going to be the group. So that won't be the same for everybody else, will it? It'll be a very different approach. What do you think is, if somebody's trying to work out how they're going to decide on who adds the value, where are the influences, what is their key strategic cohorts? How did you start to decide outside of that leadership team?
So had I not had the opportunity to encourage the whole of the senior leadership team to be part of this journey, I think you need to always go with your cheerleaders, go with the people who want to drive change and get it, because actually that's the early win. Somebody who can see the strategic value in what you're doing, they might have a really compelling use case. We had a really compelling use case with our admissions team. Admissions within university, they're the nucleus of data within a university. They see the data all the way from student outreach, all the way through from application through to clearing and confirmation to enrolment. that's all data enabled. So we use that as a real use case. So find your use case, find your lighthouse project almost to say, right, this is a thing that we're going to change. Find those cheerleaders who really get it and start with them, as well as making sure that you've got senior leadership support as well.
Yeah, that's great. And just going back to the point we were talking about before about sort of that change management, do you think it's a different approach or an enhanced approach for different people? Because let's face it, senior leadership had no choice but to get on board. That was like, this is you've got to own this. You're the role models for this. Now you're on to like cohort 3. We're about to kick off cohort 3, aren't we? Have you seen any different requirements of that change management process with the different people that are engaged in those?
Definitely. I think the further into the organisation you go, the less exposure they've had to lots of things. So really answering those why questions is really important. What's in it for me is something that you need to keep in your mind. And as senior data leaders, my job isn't to create data products. It's about selling the value of data within the organization. So luckily I've been in sales roles, so I quite enjoy selling, but selling and influencing is something that's where I spend all my time, not just with the executive, but how do I influence the executive and the leaders who've been on these courses to be advocates, because I can't do it all. So I'm trying to create that tribal leadership almost of helping me, but setting clear expectations as well. This is what your team are going to do. This is what we need you to do to support them. Actually, you should be doing it anyway as a leader in terms of one-to-ones. So it's just another dimension to that leadership that you're doing, and just reminding people of that, as well as actually we're needing to work harder on building that data community as well. So making sure we've got a really great intranet site. We've got some great testimonial videos, which we're done with you guys. So every time I send things out to people, and I send it personally from me, which is quite high maintenance, but I think it's important that it comes from the CDAO as opposed to the project team. So making sure that we link it back to, and this is the reason we're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
So you touched there actually, got me thinking about two different points. When we were talking about change management, people might not know what that actually looks like when we say about the onboarding process. Part of that was like doing some high value recorded content that could be then integrated and used in different environments, but really having key influential people in the business buying in to the purpose of what it is and why you're doing it. And I think that's really, really impactful to support any type of educational learning. And we use it then in our online hub that people can access as sort of asynchronously. If they miss a class, they can follow up, but also they can get access to customized and unique use cases from within Aston, but also hearing your own teams saying and describing things, talking about problems that you're facing within your own business adds so much more value than an off-the-shelf product anyway. But you touched there on sort of we started at the success measures. You spoke there about the value it was adding to some of those key people that are on the journey. So what other success measures have you seen? Because I know you've got some great examples about people using things differently since this program started.
So I think I think it's a really important point, Katie, in terms of making sure that you understand what good looks like and what those success measures are. So we have a variety of success measures, from some basics in terms of adoption, who's using our dashboards and when. So we have some dashboards to show who's using dashboards, and that's really helpful. And everybody can access that. And we've split that by data literacy cohorts as well. So you can see cohort 1 and how they're using it, and cohort 2. So we've done some interesting things around data, because of course we should lead with data. The other things, because I'm privileged enough to be in all of our senior leadership meetings. So I mentioned the strategy management system earlier and how we measure our success at that. We have quarterly reviews with every one of our exec team. I'm with the Vice Chancellor and some of our key colleagues, and our execs go through their progress and how they're doing with that. So actually, the conversation within those rooms now is a lot more evidenced by data. So they bring a problem or a solution or something that's gone well, and actually it's backed by data because they have it. The key one for me, though, and I spoke to you guys about this a couple of days ago. We had our senior leadership away day on Monday. We have these every quarter. We have town halls, communication, and celebrating success is one of those key things that we should be doing. And for the first year, it felt like I was dragged out to every one of those. And it's Helen again, speaking about data and why it's important, which was great. And we needed to do that, absolutely. I don't do that anymore because everybody else is doing it for me. As an example, on Monday, I felt like a proud parent because our chief people officer and her team stood up and gave a 15-minute demonstration of the HR analytics solution that we've just built for them. Not the data team, not me. It was actually them highlighting this and why this is important. That's what building a data culture looks like to me. That is it. So that's the key thing for me. And that was, it was a really proud moment for me.
Massive shout out to all the people at Aston who are doing that and making you feel that way as well, because that is success. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's one thing I always say is, look, I don't want a team of 100 people if I have 100 people on my team, I'm doing something wrong. I need at least 100 people in the organisation who can do, to a degree, what my teams can do. That's what actually democratizing data is all about.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things I was wondering about is, what were some of the apprehensions that you had coming into it? So there's going to be some people who are listening now who have some apprehensions. What are some of those apprehensions that you might have had, and how did we kind of work through those to get to a good outcome?
That's an interesting question.
Good interesting or bad interesting?
An interesting one because I wasn't really expecting it, but I guess we talked about the fact that the amount of people and the fact that actually we had to try and be all things to all people within the course content and the training materials. So actually ensuring that you're pitching it at the right level, I think, was one of my apprehensions. We started with a bit of a straw man, didn't we, Katie, in terms of the educational content?
Yeah.
And it's fair to say it evolved massively over first cohort, second cohort, and the third cohort actually is completely reshifting where we started as we changed those areas of focus. So actually making sure you get that right. And that was the advantage of working so closely with you, Katie, and you've been actually in industry as well, because we made sure that it was applicable to Aston. And actually there's lots of similarities between a university and the Royal College of Nursing. So it's quite easy to make sure it's tailored. So I think that was my major apprehension, because everybody talks about personas, don't they? And we've spoken about it today. But how do you, and everybody wants the Amazon personalization journey. If you have this, you recommend this. Yep. That's actually quite hard to do when you're doing this at scale. So how do you actually compensate for that?
I think one of the ones I observed, and then we'll take questions because they're all popping up now as well, was there was an apprehension of getting this right. And you mentioned before about that definition about data literacy, and what you didn't want was just more skills training, because that wasn't right for this group. You were taking them on this journey to success of the strategy and making sure that was front and center to everything. We talk, Helen, a lot, don't we, about it's got to be pinned on your business strategy. It's your data strategy is an enabler. It's about these things. And you were really strict, I think, in those early stages about what you wanted and what you needed, and that wasn't what you were getting lots of conversations about. And when we were starting those conversations, it's like, that this feels different. What we're talking about is people here. It's people enabling delivery of that strategy that's a business strategy. That's the purpose. That's what you're trying to achieve. And I think that started out as an apprehension.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm always, and I've delivered data strategies for any number of organisations, and it is the first thing. It's kind of data strategy 101. It has to be linked to the business strategy, and how do we make sure that we do that? And where's the golden thread? So always find that golden thread and work that through, and keep coming back to that as well, because then it really lands.
Sorry, Helen, I have another slightly unexpected question for you.
Oh no!
So you
I'm going to
come
start putting a timer on Tolu so that she's only got 30 seconds to answer it in as
And
well, to add to real pressure.
There's lots more in the chat as well that we need to get to as well.
Yeah, I'm going to get yanked in a second. So, so you mentioned that you came from kind of a more commercial background, and then you've come into education. I'm seeing that's quite a bit of a trend actually in lots of universities that we're talking to, is that they're getting lots of commercial people coming in. With that transition, what were some of the things that you were able to do as a data leader coming into the university that could make it successful?
I think it's fair to say, and there's probably lots of people from higher education on this call, so hopefully you will agree with me. But the higher education sector lags behind other sectors. I think it's fair if I say that, and why? Well, probably because they haven't had the reason to change, like a lot of commercial organisations have had to evolve over time. Secondly, I don't think the budgets are there in all honesty, and it's never been an area of focus. I think there's probably maybe 3 or 4 chief data and analytics officers across universities in the UK. In most other organisations, as Katie was saying, they stick within strategic planning functions, which is absolutely fine. So I think that is really that helped to have worked across multiple sectors, because financial services have worked there, and actually it's very, very different. So bringing that best practice was great. I think the challenge was actually the pace was very different. So how do you actually bring that pace to the higher education sector? That all changed when our Vice-Chancellor came in, and we had a very, very ambitious 2030 strategy. So actually there was an element of pace that was forced upon the organisation. So you had to adapt and evolve. So actually the way that we did that is to look at our ways of working and make sure that we're working in very much an agile way, break things down into bite-sized chunks, and then start to focus on value and delivery. So that was something that was key. So bringing those sorts of ways of working in, I think was key. Having higher education knowledge, though, is something that's really important in your team, because the data is quite complex. There's lots of different stakeholders. Typically, higher education has been very defensive in its approach to data. It's all been about regulation, as opposed to actually a more offensive strategy, which is more about value add. So it's really bringing an element of what I call the offensive strategy in, while still ensuring that fundamentally we need to satisfy our regulators. We need a license to be a university. So how do we do that? But how do we do it in a more agile way, while still delivering value?
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And let's go to the questions that people have asked. So Alexandra White, hey Alexandra. So you can see the question up on the screen. Thanks, Sarah.
So let me see. How long did it take Aston to go through the journey? Internal resources needed to support this work. So I think for us, I would say we accelerated the journey because we had that compelling use case of the 2030 strategy. So that enabled us to work a bit faster than typically we would have done. I would say we started talking to you guys, it must be about 2 years ago now, I think.
Yeah.
And then it took about 6 months to kick the cohort off, but there was a lot of tailoring the content to make sure that it was right, making sure we got the right cohorts, and then communication around that. That's something that's absolutely key, as we've mentioned, ensuring that people know why. So we got that engagement.
Academic year alignment was also quite key to you, was starting off in the appropriate time, so not over the summer months, etc.
Yeah, definitely. Make sure you avoid graduation and enrollment and all those key areas where actually it just puts more pressure on people. If you're asking them, it's only an hour of the day, but an hour when they don't have an hour is quite challenging. Coming back to the second part of the point, working with teams. So working with L&D teams, I think, is absolutely critical. Most organisations should have an organisational design strategy and an L&D strategy. So actually linking into that is something that will only benefit your data culture journey. In fact, HR need to be your best friends, because if you think about that data culture, we're looking at roles, for example, at the moment, and role profiles. How do we make sure that as we're recruiting the best people, we have those data skills as part of those roles and within our skills and capability matrices? So work with HR, work with L&D, absolutely. Work with comms if you can. We are a relatively small team at Aston, so I wear, as Katie and Tolly will profess, I wear about 5 hats. So I will do some of the stuff that L&D typically would do. I'd do some of the comms, technology teams, just in terms of making sure that the platforms are working. We use your platform. But actually, all of the technology guys coming on that journey as well. My data team were part of the first cohort. They'd already passed the self-assessment, but actually it's about enabling them to speak the same language as everybody else. And that's why we put the tech teams on there as well, because typically they see data as a technology problem. It's not a technology problem, it's a data problem, it's a business problem. So how do you change that narrative and then start talking about the business problems, and don't even mention tech and don't mention data sometimes as well?
And if it's worrying anybody, part of what we bring to the table is the heavy lifting. So we have internally like sort of L&D expertise, we have and teams that do that. We have comms and marketing expertise and brand and design. And what we are really clear not to do is step on the toes of the internal teams, but get them engaged, but say, this isn't going to be an additional load of work for you. What we want is your direction on what channels you want to use, what's the best way for us to do that, but we'll do the heavy lifting behind the scenes for you and make sure that we'll draft the comms, but you can put them where that you want and you can sense check them and sign them off, etc. But actually, it doesn't become of a side of desks for somebody else. And that's really key to part of that conversation, is that if anybody is apprehensive or nervous about, oh, this feels like a lot more work for me or for the internal teams, that's part of that early conversation that we have, is we have that expertise internally as well, and can share that with you.
Let's go to Aidan's question. Hey, Aidan. How did you address the different needs or diversity of data across differing departments, being a large organization?
I think that's a challenge for every organisation, isn't it? We're a very small team. It was me and a whiteboard when I first started all those years ago. I'm now a team of 7. I don't think we'll grow any further, in all honesty, but we deal with diverse data sets. But the way that we do it, I guess there's 2 things. We operate in what I call a hub and spoke operating model. So my team are the centre of excellence, but we have spokes within each of the functions. My team are not the experts on all of that data, because guess what? They don't own the data. So therefore, actually, we use some of those spokes within some of the areas. So, for example, we have a research spoke, we have an HR spoke, we have a finance spoke, we have a student spoke. So those are our spokes, and they're the people that are the experts within that data. And what we do is work very closely with them to understand, actually, where's the strategic requirements for bringing all of that data together. And then that's what we work on. But there's a whole prioritization piece, and it's probably, you could have a separate session on prioritization and how you do that, and 2x2 matrices in terms of complexity and value. And we've done all of that. So I think that's the way that we do it. But it's all about the conversation, because you can't do everything, and you can't do everything with all of that data that's within the organization. So where do you start? Where do you get your biggest bang for your buck? And agree that with your executive.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. Katie, do you want to pick the next one?
Yeah, so I think there's one that will resonate with a lot of people, a question that's come in, and we've got a lot, so we'll probably pick most of them up afterwards, is about data governance. So it just says LinkedIn user, so apologies, I don't know who it's coming from, but what were the major challenges in setting up the DG framework, a data governance framework, and golden record data? So I've got a bit of a view from an education point and working with your team, Helen, but do you want to add anything first of all about...
You feel free to start.
Okay. Okay, I think in terms of having a data governance framework and things in place, Kev, big shout out to Kevin, Helen's team is great at leading that internal requirements and setting up the product and the services that the team had offered, and would come into the classes and help me scope out what does this look like specifically to Aston. But part of what we talk about is the data value chain. And this is the people element of data governance, and taking people on that journey from upstream and downstream. So knowing where people sit within a data collection, ownership, management process, whether they're an inputter at the beginning and knowing how it's being used much further down the line. Most people don't fill it in or do accuracy well, because they just don't think it's valuable to anybody, or that they don't know how it's being used. Or you might be the person at the other end of that that's receiving all the data, and you don't know how it gets into the system, or who's putting it in, or why it's put in, or any of the challenges. And we group that all together as being a data quality problem. And we talk about golden records and people holding different versions of the truth. And actually, when we start to unpick it, and you start to bring people together and have conversations using the same language, feeling that they've got a voice, being able to pick up those challenges as a use case, really brought those people together. So this came up quite a bit. It was like having versions of things saved in spreadsheets, and Kev had a bit of an amnesty, and he was like, I'm not going to take it away from you, but just tell me you've got it and what you're using it for and why you're using it, because unless I know how that's going to be used and why it's being used, I can't build something that's going to meet your needs either. So it was about bringing those people into having that conversation, and that was great experience for everybody involved.
Yeah, definitely. And I think coming back to some of those challenges as well, what we didn't want to do is do a top-down data governance framework. And again, we can have a whole session about how we did that. But yes, you need a framework, you need policies and processes. People need to understand what their roles and responsibilities are. But you almost need to find out what they're doing that relates to data governance as part of their day jobs, and actually let them explore why they need to do that in a certain way to get the outcomes that they want. So we get trusted, timely data in the format that people want it. And if you don't do that, you don't get the other. So actually almost not treating it as a separate job, because I think sometimes if you treat it as a separate job for anybody, and yes, we have data stewards, yes, we have data owners, but actually what does that mean within the work that they're doing today to make sure that actually we build the framework for that, rather than it being seen as something completely separate. So I think that's how it's still challenging. I think data governance generally is really challenging and really hard work. And sometimes you need a bit of a stick as well as the carrot. Audits are always good from that perspective. So we have used that stick occasionally just to get things moving. But it comes back to actually framing it in a business way. So actually, you've got this data. I was in really interesting, actually. I know we've got 1 minute, but we were demonstrating a dashboard to our Deputy Vice Chancellor, and he looked at it and said, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. There's no such school as such and such school. And I said, yeah, that's due to the quality of the data that's been input. And suddenly the penny starts dropping. Oh, well, who inputs that? Well, it's this person in your team, and they're the data owner. And then, okay, let's get it onto the data quality issue resolution log, and let's start doing that. And then you can start educating them by actually showing where the issues are, rather than having a big program to sort it out bottom up. Show it through the output. I don't know whether that answers the question. Whoever
the last sum up on that is that what's really exciting at the phase we've now moved into is that we're creating that excitement and that pipeline for people to, if they are interested in this and making it better, getting involved in a community, getting involved in that pipeline into being a data steward or being a data owner, and how they can pick up more knowledge and experience and skills. And that's the next part that we're working on.
Yeah. Amazing. We are at time. Thank you, Helen and Katie, for joining and for doing this. And thank you to everybody that joined, everybody that asked questions. And if you feel like your question has not been answered, feel free to reach out to myself or Katie. I can't offer you to reach out to Helen unless she says so.
That's fine. That's fine. Seriously, yeah. Please reach out to me. Definitely.
Feel free to reach out to any of us now that I can say that, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. But thank you so much for spending this Wednesday lunchtime with us, and we will see you all on the next live. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully that was useful.
And thank you to Sarah behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Thank you.